Only a couple of weeks ago, I did a video about future versions of Lightroom in which I suggested, Nostradamus that I am, that AI would figure heavily. Now, Adobe have rolled out version 13.3 May 2024 release of Lightroom and Camera Raw, and what do you know, the headline items are both built on Adobe's Firefly generative imaging and Sensei machine learning tools. Rather than rehashing what Adobe's own Terry White did so well in his See What's New video, I decided to do some proper testing and also to see how the new features compare to those in other apps. The TLDR regarding generative remove in Lightroom is this: I'll be using Photoshop for this stuff for some time yet. Yep, the headline feature in Lightroom 13.3 is Generative Remove, a feature that's been in Photoshop for nearly a year now, has just been added to Lightroom. It is clearly flagged as an early access tool though, which means it's beta, which is still in development, and the inference is that we should cut Adobe some slack. I, however, will not be cutting them any slack. If they want me to tiptoe around the issues with a tool, then don't stick it in the full production version. Make a beta build like you do with Photoshop. In my testing, I found it to be more than a little flaky. In fact, based on all the test images I tried it on, the chances of it working in any given situation seem to be about 60-40 against. When it works, it's okay, but there are several problems with the new tool, some quite subtle and some more serious. Firstly, I found that it works far better with the Object Aware box disabled. I failed to get a single satisfactory fill on any of my test images when Object Aware was switched on. This appears to be because Lightroom doesn't have enough adjacent pixel data to make a sensible decision about what to fill the selected area with. When you simply draw a loose-fitting shape around the area in question, leaving a decent margin next to whatever it is you're trying to remove, and leave Object Aware disabled, it does a far better job. The funny thing is that Adobe even advise you to do this in one of their own tooltips. If it's best to make the brush bigger than the thing you're trying to remove, then why have an Object Aware button at all? Secondly, there's a lot of trial and error, regenerating the 3 removal candidates and plenty of refreshes too. Thirdly, on several occasions, it refused to work at all, claiming there was something wrong with my internet connection, which there was not. Seemed to me that it was more likely that Adobe's Firefly servers were choking under the generative load of 1 million pissed off Lightroom users. Fourthly, if you select multiple areas to remove, the processing time greatly increases, often into the enough time to make a cup of tea territory. However, even assuming that the generative remove tool does come up with a decent replacement candidate, there are further underlying problems that greatly impact its usefulness. The main issue is with the background grain or patina in the image, which the tool is not currently capable of replicating when it magics up its replacement. Sometimes the smoothness of the replacement candidate is subtle and barely noticeable, but often it's glaringly obvious that there's been a bit of a touch-up in that part of the image. What is strange is that if you use the remove tool in Photoshop, using what must surely be the same technology, it does a far superior job and closely matches the underlying grain of the image. Much like the older heal tool, the chances of a good outcome are also far better when you're just removing a small area. As soon as you scale up that remove area, and particularly if it's not a clean object with good edge definition, you're unlikely to get a usable outcome. So yeah, it's great that Adobe have seen fit to add generative remove to Lightroom, but it's too hit and miss to rely on at present, and they probably should have waited to release it. Before we take a look at the other updates in Lightroom, I decided to run a complicated test removal job through all of the well-known removal tools and apps and see what worked best. Here are the results. Affinity Photo inpainting was terrible. To be honest, even the old school Photoshop clone tool did a better job. DxO Photo Lab was terrible in a slightly different way. I wasn't expecting much here, and I'm really hoping DxO up the AI game soon. Lightroom, in its wisdom, decided to replace the Ute with a stage. I tried 21 iterations, and this was the best of the bunch. Topaz Labs Photo AI was surprisingly great. Edge definition and color sucked a bit, but I'm going to chalk this one up as a big win. Photomator was average. It removed the Ute but failed to properly render the alleyway afterwards. Luminar Neo was not much better than DxO or Affinity. I mean, we lost the Ute, but it basically just cloned in the other side of the alley. Photoshop Remove Tool was above average, but it did a mediocre job of patching up the replacement alleyway. Photoshop Generative Fill was far and away the best. I mean, look, it even got the curbing right. Alright, enough with the remove tools, let's look at the other updates. The lens blur made its debut in Photoshop a year ago. It has evidently proved popular enough for Adobe to build it into Lightroom as well.
So here's the kind of photo that's a great candidate for this fake lens blur. We might like to de-emphasize the background here so we get more interest on the central focus of the shot, which is the statues in the middle. So if we apply the lens blur, we can see that's nicely softened in the background there, and it's remained nice and crisp in the middle here, and that's because the focal range has been placed right here in the center. And if we prefer, we can try a different kind of bokeh effect, go for something like a hexagonal look. And that looks quite nice. And if you want to kind of understand what's going on with the shot in terms of the focal range from within the camera out to infinity, you can click on this visualize depth button and you get this visual color spectrum representation with the bright colors closest to the camera going out to the darkest colors further away.
I'm not a big fan of the kind of AI retouching that is possible in apps like Luminar, because it just makes me wonder what the point of taking the photograph was in the first place. Just CGI render the bloody thing and move on with your life. But lens blur is something I'd consider using in a post-processing environment because it's a subtle effect which accurately replicates something you can do with an actual camera and lens.
The lens blur tool works really well on images where you've already got some of that wide open aperture bokeh effect going on, like in this one, which I actually took on my iPhone. If we apply the lens blur to this, we can greatly enhance that blur. I think it makes the shot look pretty neat. We can reduce the amount of blur going off into the distance and tweak the type of bokeh we're using. And we can, of course, also change the distance at which it's blurring out as the aperture opens up.
The AI part of the tool figures out which parts of the image are closest to the lens and which are further away. It then classifies the image in terms of distance from the focal plane indicator to infinity and enables you to apply aperture-based bokeh effects across that range. So for instance, if you took a photograph at f8 and using the known hyperfocal distance for that lens shot an image that was sharp from front to back, you could make it look like it was shot at f2 with this tool. The main issue I encountered was edge issues, where there's a strong difference in luminance, such as between a building and the sky. It works best on relatively uniform photographs and also on images where there is already a subtle bokeh effect. There are other changes to Lightroom Classic as well, such as support for tethered capture on Sony cameras. But what caught my eye were a couple of things down the bottom end of the release notes. Firstly, Adobe say they've improved responsiveness and navigation within the Develop module. This is a welcome tweak, and it did in fact feel a lot snappier flicking between images in the thumbnail ribbon. Seems like they basically beefed up the cache in the app so there's less of a wait as the preview renders. The other item that caught my eye was right at the end where Adobe talk about AI ethics. Here's the exact text from that section. When Generative Remove becomes generally available, content credentials will be automatically attached to photos edited with the feature in Lightroom. Like a nutrition label for digital content, content credentials are tamper-evident metadata that can provide important information about how content was created, modified, and published. This is a step in the right direction and something I hope will complement the content credential features that will be built into cameras in the future. The fundamental issue with AI, as I see it, is not actually proving that something is or isn't real, but the almost total apathy of the general public who couldn't give a shit either way. But don't get me started. So that's the latest Lightroom update. Some welcome changes, but a lot of work to do by Adobe to make these production ready. How are you finding the update? Have you taken the Generative Remove for a spin yet? How did you find it? Let me know in the comments section below. If you got value from this video, then do please give it a like, and if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to my channel for more photo, video and drone related content from me. Till the next time guys, ta-ta!